So where were you before?
It's not getting away from me this time. Watch and learn, Katara.
Despite its similarities to the original animated show, Netflix's live-action adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender ends up deviating heavily from its source material by introducing a new narrative structure and thematic focus to its story. Generally speaking, the adaptation process can get very complex. Aside from thoroughly understanding the ins and outs of any particular work, whoever is adapting the work likewise needs to understand the differences present between two distinct storytelling mediums. In the case of Netflix's remake of Avatar, it involves understanding what must be changed when adapting the animated series to live action.
I'm sorry. Hey, I'm sorry.
Considering that this is the second attempt at adapting the show after the first one spectacularly failed, the Netflix remake needed to fight an uphill battle to prove that it could live up to its predecessor. In this video, I'll be looking at how the remake functions as an adaptation of the original series by touching on the structural and thematic changes made in translating the animation to live action. Before analyzing both shows to see how they differ in terms of structure, it's firstly important to define the difference between episodic and serialized storytelling.
What was that?
Episodic storytelling usually refers to a self-enclosed type of structure where there's little carryover of narrative from one episode to another. Serialized storytelling, on the other hand, refers to the opposite. Unlike their episodic counterparts, serial dramas carry over narratives from episode to episode, allowing for the creation of dense, complex story worlds that can unfold over the course of long periods of time. One of the things that the original Avatar series excelled at was its ability to seamlessly integrate a story of the week type episodic structure into an overarching serialized narrative. The first season of the show, or Book 1, divides its story into 20 episodes or chapters, each 24 minutes long. Just about every episode of Book 1 tells its own self-contained story, where a specific conflict is introduced and resolved within its runtime. Despite this, each episode still existed within a singular story that wouldn't be resolved until the finale of the entire series.
Season 1 was by far the hardest.
This is where things exponentially expanded. The pilot was a small crew.
When it comes to discussing narrative structures, it's important to emphasize the role that the show's medium plays in influencing its story. Network television, where Avatar was airing week to week in 2005, requires that people be available at a specific time on a specific day to watch any particular episode of their favorite show. For this reason, episodic storytelling evolved as a practical narrative tool perfectly tailored for broadcasting. It was with the advent of streaming that fully serialized dramas began to become more popular. Released at a different time under a different format, Netflix's live-action remake of Avatar decides to forego its predecessor's episodic structure in favor of a fully serialized story. In contrast to the original series, the Avatar remake is made up of 8 live-action episodes, adding up to a total runtime of over 7 hours. To compare, the original series' total runtime amounts to just 8 hours. Despite the fact that there isn't much of a difference between the two shows in terms of total runtime, both shows end up organizing their stories differently. The 8 episodes of Netflix's Avatar can be further segmented into only 5 separate journeys for the collective trio. Episode 1 focuses on the discovery of Aang. Episode 2 focuses on the Kyoshi warriors. Episodes 3 and 4 focus on the city of Omashu. Episodes 5 and 6 cover the mysterious disappearances in the spirit world. And episodes 7 and 8 directly adapt the Northern Water Tribe storyline. By contrast, the animated series' 20 episodes tell 17 distinct stories when accounting for all of Book 1's 2-parters. To translate these episodes into its new format, the remake combines similar stories into singular episodes, making use of multiple different plot lines happening simultaneously to different characters. To understand where the show especially falters in terms of its structure, let's take a look at the 3rd episode of the series, titled Omashu directly adapts 3 different episodes of the cartoon. It takes the setting of the King of Omashu and mashes it together with the plots of Jet and the Northern Air Temple. On top of all of this, it also adds its own original content to interweave these 3 episodes into one.
My name is Jet, and these are my freedom fighters.
In both the animated and live-action series, Jet is the leader of a group of Earth Kingdom rebels who call themselves the Freedom Fighters. Both versions of the story touch on the way Jet's freedom fighters hurt innocent people in an effort to completely rid the world of firebenders. In the cartoon, Jet is constantly compared to Sokka, specifically because both men are leaders of communities whose lives have been irrevocably changed by the Fire Nation. The original show draws a lot of parallels between these two characters who've gone through similar experiences at the hands of the same people. In the episode, Katara begins falling for Jet, but Sokka remains skeptical of him and his freedom fighters. Once it's revealed that Jet plans to flood an Earth Kingdom village to get rid of the firebenders inside of it, Katara turns on him. The Northern Air Temple, on the other hand, is another episode of the cartoon that's integrated into the Omashu episode. The episode focuses on the gang after they meet the Mechanist and his son Teo in the Northern Air Temple. Together with members of their community, the father and son moved to the abandoned temple after their village was destroyed by a flood. Now wheelchair-bound, Teo started using a mechanical glider to fly around the temple with other members of the community. The Mechanist completely transformed the temple by destroying the cultural heritages of the Air Nation. Once Aang sees the destruction in the area, he's rightfully angry at them and the way they destroyed his people's home. It's eventually revealed in the episode that the Mechanist has been supplying weapons to the Fire Nation, and in exchange, he and his community would be allowed to live in the temple safe from harm. Once the gang figures out what's going on, the Mechanist switches sides to help defend the Northern Air Temple from an incoming army of firebenders. The remake takes Jet and the Mechanist and places them within the city of Omashu, but it changes key aspects of both of their stories. The main conflict of the episode revolves around a series of mysterious bombings going on around the city, and it's eventually revealed that Jet and his freedom fighters are responsible for the bombings and that the Mechanist has been supplying weapons to the Fire Nation spies in the city. Throughout the episode, Sokka interacts with the Mechanist and the two bond over their shared talents for engineering. Katara, on the other hand, goes off on her own mission where she gets to meet the freedom fighters. Meanwhile, there are 2 other additional subplots in the episode that revolve around Azula and Zuko respectively. The Omashu episode tries to cram a lot into its 52-minute runtime, and it ends up faltering in a number of different ways. The episode retains Katara's interactions with Jet, but it also proceeds to omit all of the parallels drawn between Jet and Sokka. In fact, the 2 men aren't given any scenes to directly interact with each other, and because of this, they never get the butt heads. In the original series, meeting Jet is an essential moment in Sokka's journey as a leader, and through removing his involvement in Jet's storyline, the episode ends up feeling hollow when compared to its animated counterpart. On the other hand, through relocating the Mechanist story to Omashu, we lose an essential aspect of the original episode he was introduced in. Although the remake retains the Mechanist's involvement in the Fire Nation's violence, through completely changing the setting of the story, the remake ends up completely missing the purpose of his inclusion. The Northern Air Temple's primary purpose was to display the effects of the Air Nomad genocide, the desecration of Aang's very own cultural heritages. All of these changes beg the question: what's the point of adapting a story from the original show if you aren't going to engage with any of the larger points that the story wishes to make? Netflix's remake ends up leaving all of these storylines from the original show as dangling threads haphazardly mashed together into a single episode. Unfortunately, the next episode of the remake isn't any better. Like the last episode, this one also adapts The King of Omashu. This time, it mashes it with scenes from The Cave of Two Lovers and The Winter Solstice Part 1. The King of Omashu in the original show introduced us to the Mad King of the city, who captured Katara and Sokka and forced Aang to go through a set of strange challenges just to free them. Once Aang completes all of the challenges, it's revealed that the Crazy King is actually Bumi, one of Aang's best friends from before the war. It's also revealed that the gang was never in any real danger, since the point of all of Bumi's challenges was to test Aang's ingenuity and resourcefulness in solving problems. Bumi in the remake is completely different from his animated counterpart.
You left us. You were the Avatar.
This version of Bumi is angry at Aang for abandoning the world, which is a plot point that could work in theory. But the remake never really makes it clear why it retained some of the weird challenges that were originally in the cartoon. While this is happening, Zuko goes on his own mission to save his uncle, who was captured by Earth Kingdom soldiers and is being carted off to Ba Sing Se. On top of all of this, the remake integrates another storyline from the cartoon into an already packed episode. The Cave of Two Lovers is an episode from the second season of the original show, and instead of using it to focus on Aang and Katara's relationship as eventual romantic partners, it instead uses it to focus on Sokka and Katara's relationship as siblings. This is another change that could theoretically work, but in an already bloated episode, it ends up falling completely flat. It feels like this storyline was inserted into the episode for no real reason other than to reference its animated counterpart. Through transforming the animated show into a fully serialized fantasy series, the remake ends up missing much of what made the original show so great. Even though they might not seem important at face value, the little detour missions taken by the gang are some of the original show's best moments because of how they flesh out the different aspects and intricacies of the show's fantasy world. Because of the animated series' structure, there was a lot of room for bonding moments between all of the show's main characters. At the same time, there was also a lot of time for each individual character to have their own moment to shine. Beyond only a handful of moments, the remake doesn't really bother to give much time to the small interactions that made the original show so special. In fact, for a lot of the show's runtime, the trio were separated from each other. Both episodic and serial storytelling have their own respective strengths and drawbacks, and arguing which storytelling format is superior is completely futile. When adapting a show from one medium to another, change is not only inevitable but necessary, and this includes changes to the show's overall structure. The issue, however, with Netflix's adaptation of Avatar is that it takes a season of television that perfectly balances episodic and serial storytelling, and it forces it into the rigid structure of a typical Netflix drama. The remake sacrifices so many of the original show's best moments all for the sake of cramming its story into a new structure. And through this, it ends up inadvertently telling us as the audience that these little moments shared between the characters aren't important to the overall story. But the truth is that can't be further from the case. A common complaint that I've seen from the show is its exposition problem, where characters tend to say different things about themselves or about the show's lore in an unnatural way. I think it's safe to say that the show's dialogue problem is a symptom of how much material it tries to cram within its new structure. Each episode is optimized to be told in the most economical way possible. In the remake, characters rush to get from one place to another, leaving no real space for anything unrelated to the main plot. Adapting any work requires that one understands how to remove and change aspects of a story so that it can work within a new medium. All of this is a complicated yet necessary balancing act in the process of adaptation. And unfortunately, the Avatar remake falls short at striking this balance. One of the most tragic losses though is the removal of the direct mirroring and intercutting of Aang and Zuko's separate journeys, seen in episodes like the Southern Air Temple and the Storm. Throughout the series, Zuko essentially functions as the show's secondary protagonist, and the direct parallels between Zuko and Aang help us understand Zuko's journey within the context of the main story. Any parallels still present in the adaptation between the two characters are vague at best. From the opening moments of Netflix's live-action adaptation of Avatar, we see how the original show is changed in terms of its thematic focus. The remake begins with a fight against Fire Nation soldiers as an Earthbender attempts to send a message to the Earth King about an imminent Fire Nation attack. After being captured by Fire Nation forces, he's brought to Fire Lord Sozin himself, who tells him that the attack on the Earth Kingdom is a diversion. Sozin then proceeds to brutally burn the soldier to a crisp. This opening is very different from that of the original series, which begins with Sokka and Katara in the South Pole trying to catch fish. It's only minutes later that we get to witness the air nomad genocide firsthand. This is an act of violence that wasn't shown in the original series, and its addition in the remake is undoubtedly deliberate. So the question is, what does this tell us about this new adaptation? Well, firstly, it signals to us that this won't be like the old Avatar, which held back from showing anything too violent. This is a new show entirely, this time with an older age rating, and this version of Avatar isn't afraid to get its hands dirty. The second more important thing is that it signals to us a thematic contrast between the two shows. The original character-based opening of the animated series, a sibling argument between Sokka and Katara, is replaced with an action scene. This new opening tells its audience that this series will primarily focus on the violence and aspects of the 100-Year War not depicted in the original series. The new format change, which motivated the show to adopt a more rigid, serialized structure, also inadvertently encouraged a complete change in thematic approach.
Good. Your skills have never been sharper.
I need to be at my best when I face the world's ultimate warrior.
Our Lord Sozin is planning to attack the Earth Kingdom. The Water Tribes are already sending the warriors to aid.
Afterwards, our father set out with the other warriors to hunt down the
He ran! The ultimate warrior!
According to this, Avatar Kyoshi was the fiercest of warriors.
To be honest, where I'm from, there's not much call for a real warrior.
warrior. I should be able to do more for our people.
Such a fierce warrior.
The world is filled with warriors.
Both warriors, right?
I'm a Kyoshi warrior.
Water tribe warriors are
Warriors don't hide
The
their
warriors in
What
our
makes
family.
you a warrior?
If they're warriors,
being the warrior.
that's what a century of war will do.
That's what it means to fight a war.
That's what it means to be in a war!
You ask me what it means to be the Avatar. It means being a warrior. A mighty, merciless warrior.
Avatar's Netflix adaptation is completely obsessed with the concept of warfare and being a warrior in a way that the original was not. Although the animated series was set in the midst of a 100-year war, it still managed to be so much more than that. Despite being aimed at younger audiences, the cartoon was able to tackle a number of mature topics, many of which are lost in the adaptation. The original show went beyond the war's violence to explore how the Fire Nation's imperialism affected its characters psychologically and spiritually. Set in the Southern Air Temple, the third episode of the original show depicts the aftermath of the Air Nomad genocide. When the gang arrives at the temple, Aang is excited to see his people again. But we, as the audience, know that there's something off about this place.
What's wrong? This place used to be full of monks and lemurs and bison. Now there's just a bunch of weeds. I can't believe how much things have changed.
Throughout the episode, we watch the gang explore the different spaces and rooms in the abandoned temple. Sokka and Katara find some remnants of the Fire Nation attack on the Air Nomads, but they try to hide them from Aang. It isn't until the end of the episode that Aang discovers Monk Gyatso's corpse lying down in a room full of Firebender soldiers. We don't have to witness any direct violence to feel the horrific aftermath of the genocide. The remake keeps the exact moment of Aang finding Gyatso's corpse, but its context is completely changed. At this point in the story, Aang has already been informed that Firebenders invaded the Southern Air Temple, and the Air Nomad genocide has already been shown at the very start of the first episode. The adaptation ends up hyper-focusing on the action and spectacle of the genocide over its aftermath. Although the spectacle of violence isn't a problem in and of itself, the difference in how both shows recount the same event speaks volumes about their respective philosophies in approaching the material. Through choosing to focus on warfare and action, the remake significantly alters the journeys of all of its main characters. In the original show, Aang begins as a free-spirited soul with one major desire in life: to have fun. By learning of his destiny as the Avatar, he was forced into a situation where the future of the world was placed on his shoulders. Because of this, the trajectory of his life was completely changed. Despite all of this, Aang's carefree spirit isn't lost. We see this personality trait through all of the decisions he makes, both good and bad. Throughout the original series, Aang constantly evades and avoids his responsibilities as the Avatar. His first instinct when waking up is to go penguin sledding, he goes to Kyoshi Island to ride the elephant koi, and he goes to Omashu to ride the delivery chutes where they transport their mail. Eventually, he's forced to confront the consequences of his actions, and he's made to bring balance to the world by stopping the 100-Year War. After being discovered in an iceberg, live-action Aang doesn't get many opportunities to just simply be a kid, which goes against his entire character in the cartoon. In the remake, there's no more penguin sledding and there's no more elephant koi. He does ride the delivery chutes of Omashu, but it's really just an afterthought for him. Even the motivation behind the show's seminal moment, Aang getting caught in a storm, is changed from a deliberate act of evasion to an accident he got into after wanting to clear his head. From the very start of the show, Aang more or less directly faces his mission to end the 100-Year War, and the main conflict of his character is altered.
I hope that you're able to save your friends, but the truth is, for the Avatar, friends can be a liability.
The Avatar must walk alone, or else the ones you love will suffer.
In the remake, Aang is constantly told by his past lives that he must face his duties alone, without his friends. But because the show chooses to omit many of the trio's different bonding moments by separating them for much of its runtime, live-action Aang's conflict doesn't resonate nearly as well as that of his animated counterparts. Just like the way Aang's character was translated to live-action, both Sokka and Katara are likewise changed according to the show's new thematic focus. In the 4th episode of the original show, The Warriors of Kyoshi, Sokka is made to directly confront his flaws and grow as a person. Throughout the first few episodes of the series, Sokka's misogyny is constantly shown to us. We see how he makes sexist remarks at his own sister, and we see how he takes on a tough guy attitude despite being inexperienced. This personality trait is directly challenged after he meets the Kyoshi warriors. At the very start of the episode, the gang is captured by the Kyoshi warriors, who take them in for questioning. Sokka is in complete disbelief at the fact that a group of girls bested them, and after he attempts to confront them while training, they put him in his place. After being beaten by them, he caves in. Later in the episode, he goes up to Suki and begs her to let him train with them. She agrees, and Sokka is then made to wear their garments. Throughout the episode, Sokka is constantly emasculated in a way that's necessary for his character's growth. This episode specifically exists to teach Sokka humility and empathy. The live-action show completely changes Sokka's motivations. Rather than learning that strength and femininity can coexist, live-action Sokka is given a different journey. This time, he's insecure about his place as a warrior of his tribe, and he trains with Suki so that he can learn to become a better warrior. In a great video that also discusses Avatar's live-action adaptation, video essayist Jessie Gender describes how and why this change falls short within the overall context of Avatar's story. The journey undertaken by our main characters wasn't just about physically overpowering the Fire Nation. Instead, it was also about philosophically challenging the imperialism and settler colonialism that the Fire Nation represents. Through deconstructing Sokka's misogyny, the show tells its audience that in order to dismantle any colonial regime, one needs to hit it at its philosophical core. Through Sokka's character arc, the original series is able to beautifully articulate the importance of reconciling one's differences with the other, something that the Fire Nation isn't able to do because of their dogmatic ideology rooted in imperialism. Essentially, the original series tells us that growth isn't just about punching harder, it's also about gaining empathy for other people. Episode 2 of Netflix's Avatar, titled Warriors, unfortunately misunderstands its source material's message.
The show fails to argue what the animated series did so well, that collective unity and the valuing of the capital O other is not only the best way to fight back against oppression, but more human and necessary if you wish to make something beyond it.
Unlike its predecessor, the show ends up equating physical strength with personal growth. In this episode, Aang gets to talk to Kyoshi in her shrine, and Kyoshi lectures him about the Avatar's role as a warrior of the people. Once Fire Nation forces invade the island, Kyoshi herself possesses Aang, and she uses her bending to physically overpower the invading soldiers. In this episode, the heroes are able to save the day by literally punching harder. In comparison to the animated show's version of the same events, there's very little personal growth for any of the characters in this episode, most especially Sokka. He learns a little bit about becoming a better fighter, but he's never forced to truly change and become a more empathetic person. Sokka in this episode is nothing more than some guy who wants to learn how to punch harder. Just like her brother, Katara's character is also significantly changed in the remake. Katara in the original series is nurturing but at the same time headstrong and determined. Because she's the last waterbender from the Southern Water Tribe, she feels a special attachment to her waterbending. Katara believes that waterbending itself is a significant part of her identity and cultural roots, and because of this, she wants to learn it not just as a means of defeating the Fire Nation, but also as a means of preserving her heritage. Live-action Katara is but a shadow of her animated counterpart. Aside from removing key aspects of her personality, the live-action adaptation also alters her character by changing her motivations to learn waterbending.
There's a reason. I'm the only waterbender left in the village. They've killed all the others. Sokka just doesn't understand. I'm a warrior. I should be able to do more for our people.
From the very start of the remake, it's established that her motivation to become a better waterbender is rooted in her desire to become a warrior for her village.
According to legend, you need to first master water, then earth, then fire, right?
That's what the monks told me.
Well, if we go to the North Pole, you can master waterbending.
We can learn it together.
In the animated series, it was Katara's suggestion for the gang to travel to the Northern Water Tribe. Her drive to become a better waterbender was a key part of the original series. Although the remake retains some of Katara's determination, it ends up faltering by stripping aspects of her agency as a character. In the remake, the gang decides to travel to the Northern Water Tribe because of a vision that Kyoshi gives Aang in the second episode of the show. This change hurts Katara's character the most, because now, the gang's journey isn't motivated by their desire to learn the art of waterbending. Instead, it's to stop the impending destruction to come to the North Pole. Finally, let's move on to everyone's favorite villain-turned-hero obsessed with honor.
Well, ever since I lost my son,
Uncle, you don't have to say it.
I think of you as my own.
Zuko in the cartoon is one of the show's most beloved characters. His redemption arc to become a better person is one of Avatar's strongest storylines, and although his journey remains mostly intact in the remake, especially when compared to other characters, his motivations are similarly changed to fit the show's hyperfixation on warfare.
It'll all be worth it once I return home in glory to take my place as the rightful heir to the Fire Lord.
Perhaps it's time to consider that the throne isn't everything.
It may not have been for you. But for me, it's my destiny.
Rather than chasing the Avatar to restore his honor and return home to his family, live-action Zuko wishes to take his rightful place on the throne as the Fire Lord. This version of Zuko sees capturing Aang as a way of claiming glory instead of restoring honor. This distinction between two concepts of glory and honor is significant because it informs how both versions of the character are written. In the original series, Zuko's main motivation for restoring his honor was rooted in his desire for his father's acceptance. Animated Zuko hunted Aang to reclaim an aspect of his life that he felt was lost, his family. By restoring his relationship with his family, his father in particular, Zuko believed that he could in turn restore his honor. Zuko's character arc in the original show involved him learning that honor wasn't something that could just simply be brought back by his father. It was something that only he could give to himself. It's difficult to say how this change will affect the remake going forward, especially since the second and third seasons of the animated series focus heavily on Zuko's personal growth. For this, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Given all of these examples of how different character motivations and journeys are changed, we see how the live-action remake of Avatar ends up consistently falling short in adapting the original's thematic material. In fact, there are a lot of important thematic moments from the animated show that were completely cut from the adaptation. Okay, do you guys remember that one episode of Book 1 where Katara inspires a group of imprisoned earthbenders to rise against the Fire Nation? Even if it isn't my favorite episode of the show, and I doubt that many people would say that it's theirs, it still does a great job at articulating how colonialism isn't just limited to physical spaces and bodies, but also psychological and spiritual ones. The Fire Nation's imperialism completely destroyed the Earthbenders' spirits, and Katara wanted to help them by inspiring them to hope for a better future.
For the Earth Kingdom, attack!
Alternatively, in Book 1's 16th episode, which is also cut, we meet Jongjong, a former Fire Nation admiral who has since deserted his country. Jongjong believes that firebending is a curse to its holder, and because of this, he resents the element and its destructive nature. Aang approaches him begging to learn firebending, but he refuses, chastising Aang for his lack of discipline. Later in the episode, while literally playing with fire, Aang accidentally burns Katara, and because of this, he refuses to firebend for most of the show's remainder. It wasn't until 2 seasons later that this internal conflict was resolved in Book 3's 13th episode, The Firebending Masters. This episode is the first time we see Aang and Zuko working together as friends. The two embark on their own journey to visit the original source of firebending in an abandoned ancient Fire Nation city. It's here that they meet the Sun Warriors, who lead them to the 2 firebending masters Ran and Shaw. At the top of the city, 2 dragons emerge and engulf them in a spiral of fire. They learn that firebending isn't an element of destruction. Instead, it's an element of energy and life. To expand their empire, the Fire Nation took the element of fire and completely bastardized it. Fire was warped and distorted from its original purpose, becoming a weapon for mass destruction. In one of its greatest moments, the series is able to completely dismantle the Fire Nation's ideology, showing us the beauty of fire as our 2 main characters are enveloped in a pillar of flaming colors. To defeat the Fire Nation, each character in the show needed to go through their own journey of personal growth. Their beliefs were directly challenged by the obstacles they had to overcome, and they were in turn forced to gain a deeper sense of empathy. Unfortunately, this same philosophy is lost within the first season of Netflix's remake. Through making the concept of warfare the primary thematic focus of the story, the remake only ended up narrowing the scope of its animated counterpart. Netflix's Avatar prioritizes the characters' physical challenges over the psychological and spiritual barriers that they were originally made to face, and this changes the very essence of what made the story so great. The animated series was able to strike an almost perfect balance between the lighthearted interactions of its characters and the immediacy of the war at large. Unfortunately, Netflix's Avatar remake throws its story out of balance by messing with this aspect of the original series. Whenever we discuss the adaptation process, it's instinctual for us to focus on an adaptation's fidelity to its original text, or how true or accurate it is to the source material. Although this approach is completely understandable, treating adaptation this way will always be flawed. In an essay titled Beyond Fidelity, The Dialogics of Adaptation, Robert Stamm talks about how the very concept of fidelity or accuracy is highly problematic in nature. In fact, it's unclear whether true fidelity is even achievable during the process of adaptation, because when translating any work to a new medium, an author or filmmaker is tasked to reinterpret a text into a different form. In the case of book-to-movie adaptations, novels are a literary medium composed entirely of text, and because of this, when translating a novel to film, creative liberties need to be taken in translating literature to an audiovisual form. Unlike literature, film isn't just composed of text. It's also images, performance, music, sound effects, and so much more. Because of this, Robert Stamm argues that instead of focusing on how an adaptation is faithful to its original source, we can instead focus on how it's faithful to its new medium. So the question is, how is the Netflix remake of Avatar: The Last Airbender faithful to its live-action medium? Both animation and live-action are audio-visual forms of storytelling consisting of many of the same elements, from visuals and performance to sound and music. That being said, it's disingenuous for me to imply that animation and live action are the same. Depending on who you ask, both mediums have their own distinct advantages and disadvantages, but it's admittedly difficult to pin down what exactly these strengths and weaknesses are. For the purposes of this video, what we can instead do is look at both versions of Avatar and see how the remake uses its new medium to its advantage. Then we can compare the live action to the original show to understand where it shines and where it falters. One advantage that the live action remake has over the cartoon is the fact that it can more easily achieve a level of grit and realism that wasn't doable in the original animation. Although I've criticized some of its uses of violence earlier in the video, I'd be lying if I said that there weren't any moments of grit in the live action version of Avatar that worked in its favor, like during the Siege of the North, where we get to see the destruction and human cost of the Fire Nation's invasion of the Northern Water Tribe. In cases like this, live action can more easily bring out a sense of groundedness that's difficult to pull off in animation. The live action adaptation also takes on a more serious tone. The original show's humor relied heavily on exaggerated animations and caricatures, and it just simply wasn't possible to recreate the same visual comedy in live action. Because of this tonal change is understandable from a practical standpoint. Through seeing how the new show attempts to translate different things from the cartoon, it's clear that despite its flaws, the remake still cares about its source material. Some of the show's locations admittedly look great in live action, like Omashu and the Northern Water Tribe. Although there are a few fumbles, the costuming and the set design in the show isn't that bad either. Aside from everything I've mentioned previously, the show's casting across the board is great, and it's nice to see an all-Asian cast on screen spearheading a big-budget show on a large streaming platform. Even if the show isn't able to completely recreate all of the original's wonderful moments, most likely due to budgetary constraints, it's still clear that much care was placed into its different technical aspects. And given that they're pushing through with a second and third season, I'm still hopeful that they can improve on the work that they already did both from a technical and story perspective. That being said, the most ironic thing for me about the new version of Avatar is the fact that it still doesn't feel nearly as real as the animated show. It's really hard to pin down, but this version of Aang from the cartoon feels way more real than this one from the live action. The same goes for this version of Sokka, Katara, and even Zuko. I've already talked about the thematic changes made to the remake, many of which ended up flattening the journeys of the show's main characters. But aside from all of this, through removing all of the little nuances from their stories, these characters end up feeling less real than their animated counterparts. Despite the cartoon being composed entirely of drawings, I can still genuinely and completely suspend my disbelief to accept that this world you see right now can actually exist. It doesn't matter what medium it uses, because I genuinely feel like one version of the story is able to activate real emotions and feelings that the other isn't able to. And what is storytelling if not an emotional art? Given all of this, there's one last question that I want to answer in this video. How does Avatar's Netflix adaptation recontextualize the original series? I firmly believe that through recreating a story at a different time and in a different context, it's possible to change the way audiences consume an original work. So what do I mean by this? Well, there are countless examples of bad sequels or bad finales that in the eyes of the fans have ruined the experience of revisiting their predecessors. In the same vein, although a remake can't ruin the original property the same way a sequel can, it can still reveal things about the original that people didn't initially notice upon release. Within the 20 years that have passed since the cartoon was first released, a lot of things have changed. Because of this, the story of Avatar can take on a new meaning given all of the changes to its context. Remaking the show gave the filmmakers an opportunity to revisit aspects of the original show that can be further explored for the current generation of audiences.
You guys have made my life so enjoyable. Yeah. Thank you so much for making a great show.
Hey, congratulations, you guys are doing a great job.
It's a wonderful show.
Avatar: The Last Airbender was conceived by two longtime friends, Brian and Mike, who had an idea for a show that they wanted to pitch to Nickelodeon. The two friends came to the network with an ambitious idea that laid the groundwork for Avatar. In brainstorming their concept for an original animated series, they took inspiration from different facets of Eastern culture: Asian mythology, martial arts, philosophy, and anime. Avatar was a labor of love and passion carried out by an entire creative team of writers, animators, composers, voice actors, and consultants, and we see this very same passion oozing out of the animated series. Today, the show isn't just regarded as one of the greatest works of animation of this generation, but also one of the greatest works of fiction of all time. Remaking Avatar was a monumental task, and I just want to make it clear that I do not envy the live-action adaptation's creative team for what they had to do just to get this show off the ground. In regards to the process of creating Avatar's remake, there's an article on Netflix's website written by Albert Kim, the remake's showrunner, where he talks about how he was approached to develop the show. He states, "Netflix offers me the opportunity to develop a live-action remake of Avatar. My first thought was, why? What is there that I could do or say with the story that wasn't done or said in the original?" ATLA had only grown in popularity and acclaim over the last decade and a half, which is a testament to how complete and resonant a narrative experience it had been. So if it ain't broke, why fix it? To try and answer his own question, he goes on to talk about his motivations behind reworking the animation to live action. In the article, he talks about a number of different things, from the importance of representing Asian cultures in mainstream media, to the evolution of VFX technology, which allowed the creative team to depict bending in a real and visceral way in live action. He even talks about how through reimagining Avatar's story into a serialized narrative under Netflix's new format, the show could give more room for certain story points and emotional arcs to breathe and grow. But we've already talked about how that turned out. It's important to point out that a lot of the changes made in the remake to the original show were completely aesthetic, meaning that they don't really do anything to further engage with the actual content in Avatar's story. Even the attempt to serialize the show backfired by effectively flattening many of the stories originally from the cartoon. The Netflix adaptation never really answers Kim's question. If it ain't broke, why fix it? Let's get this out of the way. Ever since the last disastrous attempt to remake Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's clear that there's been a lot of fan outcry for a proper retelling of the story in live action. Seeing this demand, Netflix swooped in to satisfy audiences, commissioning a new creative team to translate the story to a new medium. Along with all of the show's writers, directors, cast, and crew, Albert Kim was hired to execute an incredibly difficult task. To create an Avatar remake that would satisfy Netflix's business interests while also appeasing the original show's hardcore fans. From the get-go, we see that there's a big difference in the way the original series and its remake were conceptualized and produced. Brian and Mike, along with Aaron Ehas, Avatar's head writer, and the entire creative team, were given an opportunity to make something that they were all collectively passionate about. They were able to turn what Nickelodeon originally wanted into their own material with new and fresh ideas that hadn't been seen before in children's media. The Avatar remake may not do a very good job at further exploring most of the original's themes, but it does do a good job at recontextualizing its predecessor by highlighting how TV storytelling has changed over the past 2 decades. Since the premiere of the cartoon, streaming platforms have gone on to change the television landscape by completely transforming the way shows are made. Although network television throughout its entire history has always been a commercial industry, throughout the last few years, streaming platforms have continued to push this even further. Netflix's Avatar may be Avatar in name, but it doesn't feel like Avatar. When talking about art made by corporations, it's always really difficult for me to separate the art itself from the underlying business interests behind it, mostly because those same interests always tend to end up seeping into the final product. But it's important to note that there's a giant difference between wanting to make money to make more art versus wanting to make art to make more money. And whichever way a piece of art is created changes the way audiences react to and interact with said art. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's impossible to make art within the confines of commercial interests. All I'm saying is that it just doesn't feel the same when a piece of art is made as part of a studio's business strategy. With Netflix's adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender, We now have a fully serialized live-action remake of a show that already worked perfectly fine in its episodic animated format. We have a show that doesn't strive to say anything greater beyond what had already been said by the original series. We have a show that aesthetically updates the original text whilst only being able to capture a fraction of its wonder and creativity. Avatar's live-action remake will always be Netflix's version of Avatar, and nothing more. From the way the show was conceived to the philosophy driving the show's themes and structure, the remake was always gonna turn out the way it did. A pale imitation of what had come before it. No matter what, the original series will continue to stand the test of time as an epic tale of a group of kids working together to fight a force much bigger than them. A tale of bravery in the midst of ongoing violence and imperialism. A story that will continue to be relevant for a long time moving forward. The world will always need stories like Avatar, but they don't need to literally be Avatar. And you know what? I'm completely fine with that.